The panel members are Judd Arnett, a columnist for the Detroit Free Press from Detroit. Stanley Krajewski, editor of the Polish Daily News from Detroit. Claude Monroe, director of the Ecorse Community Center from Ecorse. Mrs. Janet Claver, housewife and former schoolteacher from Ann Arbor. Richard Vidmer, graduate student and former quarterback at the University of Michigan from Ann Arbor. Richard Ferrara, M.D., a dermatologist from Grosse Pointe Park. Edith Blinn Hall, Public Relations Counsel from Detroit. That's our panel for tonight. And now, here is your moderator, Bud Wilkinson.
And now, it's my pleasure to introduce a man that I have known, respected, and admired for many years, Richard Nixon. Good evening, sir.
Here we are again. Yes, sir. Let's put him on. I'm tied up with the telephone. Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, John. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Bud Wilkinson, and I think that all of our television audience, in view of this sports consciousness of this great city at the present time, will be interested a little about you. Of course, everybody that hears Bud Wilkinson do the commentating on ABC Sports has heard of him and remembers his great Oklahoma teams, but I'm glad that he's on my team and I'm on his team now. Bud Wilkinson, our... and... Incidentally, it looks like we're in a winter city. I was thinking with the Tigers in the World Series and the Lions doing so well, I guess hope a little of that winter business rubs off on me while I'm in Detroit. And then, too, we have some other celebrities in the audience that I would like to introduce before we go to our panel. We have the Governor of Michigan, Governor George Romney. And then we have two of, I think, the greatest campaigners in the country, Mrs. George Romney and Mrs. Richard Nixon, sitting on either side. The other day when I was in Salt Lake City, I mentioned the fact that General Eisenhower once said when he was talking about politicians and the fact that they were so different, there was only one thing that he thought most successful politicians had in common, and that was the ability to marry above themselves. And I pointed out that both Governor Romney and I did that, of course. And then my two daughters, Tricia and Julie. They have just arrived here from a campaign appearance in Buffalo. They're getting their share, too, their baptism in fire to an extent. They had a little heckling, but they learned to handle it. After all, anybody that lives in our family learns how to be heckled. And now we want to go directly to the questions, because I know that we have a panel here that will have a number of questions, and we have a full hour for those questions. Judd Arnett.
Mr. Nixon,
Free Press.
you've been saying in this campaign that under your government, you wouldn't pour billions of dollars into programs that aren't working. I wonder if you'd be more specific and tell us which programs you'd repeal.
Well, when I was speaking particularly of programs in that field, I was referring to those that dealt with the problems of poverty in the cities. I'm referring, for example, to many of the poverty programs, particularly the Job Corps program. I'm referring to some of the approaches to public housing, and I'm referring to some of the programs in the field of welfare. Now, when you talk about repealing, I'm not referring to a meat-axe approach in which we just go down and cut out all of those programs. But what I am suggesting is this. I think that in the field of training for jobs, for example, we look at the Job Corps. We poured billions of dollars into that. It was a very well-intentioned program. But what happened? 2 out of 10 of those, only 2 out of 10 of those who received Job Corps training got jobs to which they attributed the Job Corps training for, and it cost us $11,000 to train each one of them. I think the better approach is to give a tax credit to private enterprise to train the unemployed for the jobs, for real jobs, so that they will get the jobs. I would substitute that for a substantial part of the Job Corps program. Let's take the field of housing. Substituting for massive federal housing in which we, in effect, take those who are tenants of federal housing and they become a colony apart. a people apart from the rest. I like the approaches that a number of Democrats as well as Republicans, people like Chuck Percy, Senator Javits, and the late Robert Kennedy have suggested, and I, of course, have recommended them too in my speeches, Bridges to Human Dignity, in which we would provide, again, the tax credit to private enterprise to not only build private housing, individual housing that could be owned by individuals who obtained it, but also the opportunity for people who live in high-rises to own their houses, because with that ownership will come the pride and the dignity that you're not going to get from living in public housing and feeling to be a class apart. It's this kind of approach that I'm speaking about. What I'm really saying is this. I think that over the past 4 years, we have seen billions of dollars poured into programs for a federal approach to the solution of our problems. What we're going to do is to have federal housing and federal jobs and federal welfare. What we need now is to move away from that approach. Have the federal government act where private enterprise can, but to enlist private enterprise and volunteer enterprise in building the housing, providing the job training, and also providing the opportunity for individuals to move up, to become owners and managers and not just workers. That's the kind of approach I would have as distinguished from the present program. Mr. Monroe.
Mr. Nixon, you spent 8 years in Washington as Vice President of the United States, right? And then you lost an election as President of the United States. You lost an election in California. And today, the Republican Party and your campaign managers is telling us about a new Nixon. What's the difference between the new Nixon and the old Nixon?
Well, Mr. McGraw, the new Nixon is a little older. He doesn't have quite as much hair, as my wife points out from time to time up here. But on the other hand, I think perhaps the best answer to that question is that when an individual in politics or in education or in the business of writing for newspapers, when he ceases to grow, when he ceases to change to meet the changing conditions, then you can be sure that he no longer is going to be living with the generation of which he is a part. I would have to say at this point, and I'm very proud of this, that over the past 8 years, I've had a chance to travel through the world. I've had a chance to study the problems of the world, not as a participant, but one who was sitting on the outside looking at them. I believe I found some solutions to those problems. They're new solutions for the new world. They aren't the old solutions of 30 years ago, most of which Mr. Humphrey now is advocating, but they are new approaches to those problems that I think we need, just as I answered in the question to Mr. Arnett. And I believe that I can bring these new approaches that I would not have had 8 years ago, that I can bring them to the solution of our problems, solutions to the problems of our cities, solutions also to the problems in the field of foreign affairs, solutions in the problems, the very difficult problem of restoring respect for law, respect for order, and having that with justice and progress. That is what I would say is the new Nixon as I understand it. Mr. Vidmer.
Mr. Nixon, because of the recent widespread demonstrations and disruptions on American campuses, there seems to be quite a bit of public pressure now on campus administrators to get tough and to crack down on the student rebels. What is your view in general on the role of dissent in society, and in particular, the role of dissent on the college campus?
I'm for it. I'm for dissent because as I look back over the 190-year history of this country, as I'm sure you have as a student at Ann Arbor, I find that dissent is the great instrument of change. It's the instrument of progress. And that's what really distinguishes a free society from the totalitarian societies. We change those things by reason of the dissent that are wrong. We aren't frozen into them. On the other hand, when we look at dissent, we have to recognize that it can also be an instrument of destruction if it does not follow a certain rule that we should all understand, provided we look at our American political system. Now, I've talked in a number of university campuses, and I've had some university and college students say, when I point up that I think that there should be peaceful dissent and not breaking the law, they said, well, don't you believe in the American Revolution? And I said, I certainly do. But I point out that those who participated in the American Revolution had no peaceful way to redress their grievances. They had to have a revolution in order to do it. And then our founding fathers had the genius to set up a system of government which provides a method for peaceful change. Only once in the history of our country, 100 years ago in the Civil War, did that not work. And then we had to resort to warfare in order to resolve the differences. But when you have a system that provides a peaceful method in which to change what we don't like, I don't believe there's any cause that justifies breaking the law or engaging in violence. And I think we should get that across to all Americans. I believe it's essential to get that across, particularly in the college campuses, because those who come from the colleges and the universities are going to be the thought leaders in the future. They have to go back to their communities, and they have to make clear that while we believe in vigorous dissent, that on the other hand, that when we engage in violence, when we break the law, we destroy, in effect, the very system that we're attempting to build. And I think as we look at our college, universities, and campuses today, the great majority of students would support the proposition that I've just set forth. And I would say further, I noticed just yesterday in the paper, today in the paper, of a rather violent demonstration in Seattle, Washington, conducted by some of the students, I understand, from the universities in that area against Hubert Humphrey. I think that was an appalling situation. Some of those students demonstrated against me, too. That's something different. I will have to take it. But for the Vice President of the United States to be submitted to that kind of what was really not dissent, but an attempt to shout down the meeting, I say that is the difference. Let me put it this way. If anybody in an audience wants to get up and raise a question, if he wants to heckle in the great American or British tradition, that's one thing. But when he shouts and shouts and shouts and tries to deny to the majority the right to listen, then I think you ought to stop it, and stop it as effectively and fairly as you can. That's what I think.